Something was already wrong with the campus clocks. At Kurogane University, every tower clock is synchronized to the central bell sigil beneath the administration dome. That is one of the first things they teach you in orientation, because timing governs everything here. Barrier rotations, dorm curfew seals, dual permits, lab access, even the vending machines in the lower engineering block. If the clocks disagree, you report it. If they disagree twice in 1 week, classes are suspended and the wardens sweep the grounds. On the morning I was taken, the clock above the law faculty read 10:14. My wrist tag read 10:17. The drone at the west gate announced 10:16 in its usual polite voice. No alarm sounded. Students kept walking, heads down, coffee in hand. Time splitting into 3 versions was an administrative inconvenience and not a structural warning. That was inconsistency number 1. Inconsistency number 2 was the campus goddess waiting for me behind the forensic archives building with a folded umbrella, a surgical mask, and a kidnapping plan. Her real name was Saren Vale, but nobody used it unless they wanted trouble. On campus, she was the White Banner, top-ranked in practical sigil combat for 3 years straight, heir to a shrine-linked family, public face of the Student Discipline Council, and the sort of person professors stood up for even when she arrived late. Clean grades, clean record, clean blade work, the kind of person institutions build statues for before they die. I had never spoken to her alone, at least not in this life. I only add that last part because she did. I was cutting behind archives to avoid the noon crowd when she stepped out of the alley shade. They pressed a suppression talisman to my throat and said very calmly, "Don't fight me, Ren. We are already married." I am not proud of my first response. I laughed. It was reflex. The line was absurd. Her timing was worse. And I had an exam in 20 minutes on evidentiary chain integrity. Then the talisman bit through my skin and my knees nearly folded. Suppression tags are not supposed to work on civilians that hard. They dampen active techniques, scramble intent channels, maybe numb a limb if the user is reckless. This one dropped my hearing to a tunnel and turned the air thick in my lungs like I'd run uphill in wet clothes. Saren caught me before I hit the concrete. "Sorry," she said, and she sounded like she meant the pain, not the act. "I tuned it for your pulse pattern." That was the exact moment the situation stopped feeling like a prank. She dragged me backward into the service alley with efficient, practiced movements. Opened a maintenance hatch I swear was not there a second earlier, and half lowered, and half threw me into a narrow shaft lined with old utility ladders and fading ward paint. By the time I got enough breath back to curse her properly, she was already climbing down after me and sealing the hatch overhead with a paper strip sigil that burned black at the edges. Light narrowed to a thin line, then disappeared. The shaft smelled like metal dust, wet stone, and old incense. "Say anything intelligent yet?" she asked from above me. "You're insane," I said, which was not intelligent but felt accurate. "Possible," she said. "Keep moving." She dropped past me, landed 2 rungs below without a sound, and kept descending. I had exactly 3 choices. Stay put in a maintenance shaft with a numb throat and no signal, climb back to a sealed hatch keyed by someone else's sigil, or follow the most dangerous student on campus underground while she talked about marriage like she was confirming the weather. I followed. Yokurogan is old enough to have layers the official maps don't admit. Everyone knows that in the casual way students know ghost stories and exam leaks. There are retired tunnels under the chemistry hall, collapsed catacombs under the chapel wing, and an entire rumored tram platform beneath the athletics dome that appears only during typhoon season. Most of it is nonsense. Enough of it is true to kill people. Saren moved through the lower service shafts like she had memorized them under pressure. Left at a steam junction. Right through a rusted maintenance door. Down 2 short ladders into a corridor tiled in black and white stone, the kind of old craftsmanship the university stopped paying for decades ago. She finally stopped in a utility chamber lit by a single emergency strip. My throat still burned where the suppression tag touched me. I leaned on a pipe manifold and tried to breathe normally while she peeled off the talisman, checked the burn mark with an annoyed frown. and handed me a sealed water pouch. "Drink." I looked at the pouch, then at her. "You kidnapped me." "Yes." "You assaulted me." "Yes." "And now you're hydrating me." "You dehydrate when your pulse gets forced down." She crouched by the door and began drawing a circular seal in chalk and copper dust. "I need you conscious for the next part." I drank. That is what people always judge when you tell them a story like this. They imagine bravery as a pure thing. In practice, if the person who abducted you clearly understands your physiology better than you do in that moment and offers water, you drink the water. My pulse steadied. The burn at my throat cooled from fire to ache. I looked around properly for the first time. Utility chamber was the wrong term. It had pipes and breaker boxes, yes, but the back wall was older than the rest. Temple stone inset with brass channels, engraved with concentric circles and script I recognized from preservation law seminars. Contract script, binding language, the kind used for interhouse oaths, inheritance partitions, sealed testimony, and other things people pretend are purely symbolic until blood is involved. In the center of the stone wall sat a bronze plate with a handprint recess and a name slot. Empty name slot. That was inconsistency number 3. Campus infrastructure doesn't use contract stone. Not legally. I watched Serene finish the chalk ring and stand. "Start talking." She wiped chalk off her fingers with a cloth and considered me as if deciding what order to give the madness in. "Short version," she said. "You are in danger because the campus registry recognized you this morning." "Recognized me as what?" She held my gaze. "My husband." I stared at her. The emergency light hummed. Water dripped somewhere in the pipes. My exam was definitely gone. I said, "Oh, try the long version." Something that might have been relief crossed her face. "Good." She took a folded paper from her coat pocket and tossed it to me. It was an Academy threat bulletin, stamped internal, not for student circulation. The kind discipline council officers carry when they want to scare department heads into compliance. At the top, in clean black print, Level 3 Anomaly Review. Subject, Unauthorized Resonance Event, South Quadrant Trigger, Legacy Bond. Signature detected, status pending containment. Below that was a grainy still image from a corridor camera. Me, outside the law faculty, turning my head toward the clock tower at 10:14, or 10:16, depending which system you trusted. Around my throat, visible only in thermal overlay, was a faint ring of light. I touched the burn mark and felt my stomach drop. That wasn't there before. I said. "No," Saren said. "It woke up today." I looked at the bulletin again. Legacy bond signature? You're telling me the university thinks I triggered some old contract mark. I'm telling you the university is correct. I don't have a contract mark. You have one you can't remember. That landed harder than it should have. Maybe because she said it without drama. Just a fact. Set on the floor between us. I folded the bulletin slowly. You need to explain why the Discipline Council's top student is abducting a third-year legal forensics major into an unregistered chamber because of a memory problem. I'm not Discipline Council anymore. I blinked. Since when? Since 8:40. That was new. Why? They issued a containment notice with your face on it. I looked at her, then at the bulletin, then back at her. Containment is for cursed objects and unstable casters. Yes. I'm neither. She didn't answer. That was answer enough to raise my blood pressure again. I stepped toward the door she'd sealed. Open it. No. I have classes, Saren. You have hunters. I stopped. She must have seen the shift in my face because her tone changed. Less command, more calculation. Listen to me carefully. There is a subsystem under Kurogani's central registry called the Continuity Ledger. Officially, it stores old oath disputes and sealed land grants from when the campus was still shrine territory. Unofficially, it tracks unfinished bonds, contracts that failed, were interrupted, or were suppressed but never dissolved. Most of the time, it does nothing. most of the time. This morning, after the South Bell desynced, it flagged your pulse as a matched legacy signature. Matched to what? To me. Silence. I laughed again, but this time there was no reflex in it, just disbelief trying to keep shape. You don't get to say match to me like that solves anything. It solves the part where I know why they're moving early. Who is they? She looked at the stone wall, not at me. The office that manages continuity reviews. Officially, a records committee. In practice, a containment bureau with better stationery. That tracked with Kurogane. Every dangerous system on campus wears a clerical face first. I held up the bulletin. If this is real, why not go to a professor, a warden, tribunal liaison? Her expression flattened. Because the alert was countersigned by Dean Narukami. I stared. Narukami teaches civic ethics. Narukami teaches whatever keeps the donor council comfortable. That was a line I might have said about him privately over cheap noodles. Hearing it from Saren Vale, campus icon, made it more credible and less comforting at the same time. I tried a different angle. You said we're already married. Explain that without sounding insane. She reached into her satchel and brought out a second document sealed in wax, old style, with a sigil pressed into the center I did not recognize. Not university crest, not Vale family mark, and 3 interlocked circles split by a vertical line. She hesitated before handing it over, and in that hesitation I finally saw strain. Not fear for herself, fear of getting the order wrong. Open it, she said. The wax seal broke too easily, like it had been opened before and reset. Inside was a single sheet of heavy paper covered in dense contract script, and one attached strip of translucent film, the kind used for mnemonic imprints in upper division relic labs. At the bottom of the page were 2 names in older calligraphy. One was Saren Vale. The other looked wrong until I tilted it under the emergency light. Not Ren Ishida, which is my legal name in this life. Ren Aoshiro. I had never seen that surname before. My mouth went dry. This is fake. Probably, she said. The answer caught me off guard. What? She pointed at the script. Or rather, parts of it are genuine and parts are reconstructed. I found it in a sealed archive under the chapel sub-basement 3 months ago. The paper dates to late barrier era. The signatures are older than the current campus charter. The witness line was scraped and rewritten. The enforcement clause is damaged. I looked at her. And your conclusion from that was kidnapping me? My conclusion was that someone buried a partial bond document linking my line to a name that your pulse now pings under continuity review. That sounded less insane and more dangerous. I hated that it also sounded like evidence. I lifted the translucent film strip. What is this? A mnemonic imprint. It replays the last recorded emotional state used to seal the document. Emotion-based playback? Yes. That's unstable. I know. You used it already. A pause. Yes. And she looked away just long enough to confirm it had gone badly. It played grief, then static. Second time it played a corridor, blood on stone, your voice saying my name, and a line I haven't been able to verify in any archive. My fingers tightened around the film. What line? She met my eyes again. If they reset us, don't let me sign alone. The room felt colder after that. Though the pipes were still warm, I did not recognize the sentence. Some part of my body did. My throat mark burned once, sharp and fast, like a pulse answering a knock. I put the film down carefully. You can't expect me to hear this and just accept it. I don't. Then why the speech? Because in 12 minutes, campus security drones will sweep the South Service shafts using the containment bulletin route. And if they find you before I can show you the ledger room, they'll classify you as an unstable contract subject. She checked the old wall clock above the breaker panel. Now 11. That was the first overt time pressure she'd given me. I checked my wrist tag by reflex. No signal, Blank face, she noticed. We're under a damped ward. Convenient. It's why I brought you here alive. And I rubbed my face with my good hand and looked at the stone wall again. The empty name slot, the handprint recess, the contract channels. Too much detail for a prank. Too coherent for ordinary delusion. If Serene wanted to ruin me socially, she could do it from a podium. She didn't need hidden chambers and internal threat bulletins. I said, "Suppose I believe you long enough to keep moving. What exactly is the plan?" Get to the continuity ledger annex before the review team. Confirm whether your signature matches archival residue, active bond carryover, or manufactured insertion. Those sounded like categories she'd memorized from an internal manual. And if it's active bond carryover? Her jaw tightened. Then the campus has been running under a false declaration for at least one cycle. One cycle of what? She didn't answer. Instead, she crouched at the chalk seal by the door, pressed 2 fingers to the center, and whispered a release phrase. That copper dust flared blue, then peeled away in a spiral. "Move," she said. "Argument on the stairs." We didn't make it to the stairs. The corridor outside the chamber angled left into a service passage, lined with old conduit rails. We had covered maybe 15 meters when the emergency light switched from white to amber and a voice came over the maintenance speakers. Calm and genderless. Unauthorized movement in restricted infrastructure zone. Remain where you are for registry assistance. Saren swore under her breath. They found the hatch faster. I looked up the corridor. You said we had 11 minutes. I said drones had 11. I didn't mention wardens. From the far end, 3 security frames unfolded from wall alcoves I would have walked past without seeing. Campus drones, older model but heavily modified, jointed limbs, lacquered masks, restraint projectors mounted under the forearms, registration lenses glowing blue, safe system failure, right on schedule. Though campus security is supposed to warn, isolate, and summon human staff, these units came out already armed for seizure. The lead drone scanned us and shifted lens color from blue to red when it reached my face. Legacy signature confirmed. Containment priority updated. Secondary subject. Former discipline officer. Hostile. Kill. Former discipline officer, I said. That's not a common student problem. Serene had already drawn a folded strip from her sleeve. On my mark, cover your ears. What? She snapped the strip in half and slapped both pieces against the conduit rail. The corridor detonated with sound. Not an explosion. Resonance. A shriek of metal frequencies layered with shrine tones, high enough to cut through the maintenance speakers and overload the drone's registration lenses. Their red sensors blew white, projectors misfired, and one restraint net launched sideways into the wall, pinning its own leg frame. I hit the floor anyway, in hands over my ears too late, vision going gray at the edges. Saren moved through the noise like she'd rehearsed it. One step, pivot, chalk blade from her boot, strike to a joint seam. The first drone collapsed at the shoulder. She used its falling weight as cover, kicked off the wall, and drove a second sigil strip under the mask of the lead unit. It froze mid-targeting cycle, limbs locking in place. The third drone recovered fast and charged straight at me. I had no combat training worth mentioning. Legal forensics majors learn scene preservation, not anti-frame takedowns. But panic is a form of movement, and movement beats kneeling still in front of a machine with a restraint cannon. I grabbed the loose conduit hook at my side and swung it at the drone's lens as it lunged. I expected to miss. I did not. The hook connected with a crack, the lens casing split. And for half a second, the drone's inner core flashed exposed script, a ring of tiny contract characters spinning around a central node. The same script as the stone chamber. The drone reeled. Saren looked at the exposed core, and her expression changed from focused to furious. They're using ledger language in campus security hardware, she said, almost to herself. Of course they are. She slammed her palm to the drone's chest plate and shouted a cut phrase I didn't understand. The contract ring inside the core stuttered, reversed, and then the whole frame dropped hard, dead weight, sparks leaking from its back vents. The corridor went quiet except for my breathing and the soft ticking of cooling metal. Saren turned to me. "Can you stand?" "Yes," I said. And then, because my hearing was still ringing, "Probably." She grabbed my wrist and hauled me up. Her hand hit the skin just below my pulse point and she flinched. "Again," she said. "What?" "Your pulse just doubled and then matched an external count." She looked back at the disabled drones. "It's syncing when you're stressed." "I'm being chased through illegal tunnels by armed campus machines, Saren. Stress is not a bug." A sound came through the maintenance speakers then, not the neutral assistant's voice from before. Human this time, male, smooth, amused, amplified through old wiring. "Saren, Ren, I appreciate the initiative, but you're making a records review look theatrical." Saren's grip tightened. "Narukami." I'd heard Dean Narukami lecture to full auditoriums with the tone of a patient uncle explaining ethics to future leaders. Hearing him in a sealed service corridor while disabled drones smoked at our feet changed the effect. "Dean," I said, because I wanted him to know I recognized the voice. "Mr. Ishida," Narukami replied. "I would prefer you remain where you are. The continuity systems are delicate. Improvised access risks memory fracture. Memory fracture, a real term. I rarely used outside relic accidents and illegal imprint labs." I looked at Saren. She gave the smallest shake of her head. "Do not answer him, or at least do not answer honestly." Narukami continued, too calm. "Miss Vale, your removal from student discipline does not invalidate your duty of care. Deliver Mr. Ishida to the nearest marked checkpoint and we can resolve this without further misconduct." Saren leaned toward the speaker grill and said, "You countersigned containment before review. Because your archive theft confirmed the old bond file was active. So he knew about the document." I stepped closer to the speaker. "If it's active, why classify me as containment instead of witness?" A beat. Then Narukami said, "Because the last time this signature surfaced, 19 people died." The corridor seemed to narrow around that sentence. I felt Serene turn toward me, measuring my face for recognition I didn't have. Narukami's voice came back, softer now, almost reasonable. "You are not being punished, Mr. Ishida. You are an anomaly linked to an unresolved historical event. The university has procedures." Saren laughed once, sharp and humorless. "Your procedures scrub names and rebuild timelines." "Procedures preserve continuity," Narukami said. "You, of all students, should understand the alternative." She stepped back from the speaker. "Move," she told me, already pulling me down a side passage I hadn't noticed. Narukami's voice followed us through the metal. "If you take him to the annex, the ledger will choose a declarant. If it chooses him, I cannot guarantee campus stability." That line was almost a warning. Almost. We ran. The side passage sloped downward, then opened into an old stairwell wrapped around a hollow shaft where cables and prayer ribbons hung together in dusty loops. Kurogani's architecture always did that. Engineering threaded through ritual, neither side admitting it needed the other. My legs were shaking now, partly from the suppression tag, but partly from adrenaline, partly from the growing suspicion that my ordinary life had been sitting on top of somebody else's unfinished legal disaster. Halfway down the stairwell, Saren stopped so suddenly I nearly hit her. She was staring at the wall. At first, I saw only water stains. Then the emergency light shifted and the stains resolved into writing. Old marker ink, faded but legible in pieces. Dates, arrows, names crossed out, timing notes, 1014/1016/1017. Do not trust tower sync. If reset occurs, check west clock first. R. Remembers late S signs too early. I read the initials twice. My throat mark burned so hard I tasted metal. Saren touched the wall with 2 fingers, as if confirming it was physically there. Her voice, when it came, was lower than I had heard it yet. "I didn't write this." I looked at the fresh scrape marks near one line. "Somebody did recently." "Not recently," she said. Look at the oxidation on the stair rail under the ink drip. This has been here for years. The last line sat lower than the others, half hidden behind a hanging cable. If he laughs, start over. I stared at it long enough that Serene grabbed my shoulder. Ren. I laughed, I said. She did not ask what I meant. She already knew. A deep vibration rolled through the shaft, stronger than any maintenance system should produce. The prayer ribbons lifted in the draft. From somewhere below us came the sound of heavy locks releasing one after another. Saren looked down into the dark and swore. They opened the annex without us. Can they do that? Not without a declarant. Another vibration, then a rush of cold air carrying incense ash and ozone. Narukami's voice returned, no longer using the speakers. This time it came from below, echoing up the stairwell through the shaft itself. Miss Vale, he called. You were always going to bring him here. I simply preferred not to waste more drones. Nusarin drew a narrow blade from inside her sleeve. Not a campus practice tool. Live edge, black lacquer hilt, old family work. I looked down the stairwell and saw light moving across stone far below. Patterned light, rotating in concentric bands. Tell me the rule, I said. She glanced at me, surprised, then answered immediately. If the annex opens and the ledger recognizes you, do not speak your full name first. Why? Because declarants are bound by first self-identification. Her eyes flicked to the wall writing, then back to me. And if Narukami is right about the casualty count, somebody has been using the name order to force outcomes. That was not enough information. It was enough rule. We kept descending. At the bottom, the stairwell opened into a circular hall cut from black stone, older than any part of campus I'd seen. Contract channels ran through the floor in spirals toward a central door made of bronze and cedar, standing half open on its own. Above the doorway, in faded gold script, were characters I recognized from archival law and never expected to see outside a casebook. Continuity Annex, Declaration Chamber. The air inside pulsed with light, not bright but rhythmic, as if the room beyond was breathing. Dean Narukami stood just inside the threshold with 2 robed registry officers and a portable seal frame mounted on a tripod. He looked exactly like he did in lectures. Immaculate collar, silver pin, gentle posture, no visible strain. If not for the armed officers and open chamber, he could have been waiting to start a seminar. His eyes moved from Saren to me and rested there. Mr. Ishida, he said, you arrived in time after all. Saren stepped in front of me, blade low and ready. You opened a declaration chamber without tribunal oversight. Narukami inclined his head. I opened a continuity hazard review under emergency authority. That authority expires if he enters as witness. Only if he remains a witness. The officer shifted, seal frame humming to life, and for the first time I understood the full shape of the trap, not a simple containment. A forced declaration. If I crossed that threshold wrong, under the wrong name, with the wrong system already primed, the ledger could bind whatever story they needed into the official continuity record before anyone outside the annex even knew a review had happened. My pulse hammered. The burn at my throat flared in time with the light inside the chamber. Narukami watched me the way examiners watch students who have just realized the question was different than they thought. Please, he said, and his voice was almost kind. Let us end this cycle cleanly. Saren's free hand found my wrist in a grip that was steady only by discipline. I could feel her pulse too. Fast. Human. I looked past Narukami into the annex and saw on the far wall a ring of names turning slowly in bronze light. One of them was mine. Not Ishida. The other name beside it was already glowing. Saren's. Not just glowing either. Anchored. The bronze light around her name held steady, while every other inscription on the wall rotated in and out of focus like fish under dark water. Mine, Ren Aoshiro, the name I still did not remember owning, kept drifting past the inner ring and brightening each time it crossed her line. Narukami had started the chamber with one declarant already half-bound. That explained the urgency. It also explained why he sounded patient. He thought the outcome was now mostly mechanical. Saren felt me go still and tightened her grip on my wrist. "Don't stare at the wall," she said under her breath. "It reads fixation as consent." Convenient rule. It's an old chamber. Everything is a rule. Narukami raised one hand, not in a threat. I am more like a lecturer settling a room. "You're both making this harder than necessary. Miss Vale's line has already been provisionally recognized. We can stabilize the resonance, contain recurrence, and preserve institutional continuity. You need only step forward and answer one question." I looked at the two registry officers flanking him. Their robes were plain, but the seal frame between them was not. Portable declaration scaffold, tribunal-adjacent build, custom loops for pulse and vocal capture. That kind of equipment does not come out for student misconduct. It comes out when someone wants a record that survives appeal. "What question?" I asked. Narukami's expression did not change. "Identity." Saren gave a short, disbelieving laugh. "You opened a recursive bond chamber and primed a forced identity query without a tribunal auditor present. That isn't continuity review. That's a scripted declaration." Narukami finally looked annoyed. Language matters less than outcome when structural stability is at risk." "Structural stability," Serene repeated. "You mean donor panic." He ignored her and spoke to me. "Mr. Ishida, if that is the name you intend to use, your pulse signature triggered a legacy marriage bond on protected ground. The last linked event ended in mass casualty during a failed reset. I am trying to avoid a repeat." There it was again. Reset. He kept using the term like I was supposed to understand it, which meant either he thought I knew more than I did, or he needed me to believe the chamber's interpretation before I crossed the threshold. I shifted slightly, enough to angle my view past him into the annex floor. The chamber was circular, tiered, and old enough that the stone had a soft shine where generations of hands and knees had worn it smooth. Contract channels spiraled inward to a recessed dais ringed by cedar pillars wrapped with paper seals. Out above the dais hung a suspended lens of clear crystal threaded with hairline cracks. Beneath that lens, carved into the floor, was a double declaration circle with two handprint recesses and a shared name line between them. The shared line was split. One side glowed bronze, the other pulsed white, irregular, syncopated, like a heartbeat trying to remember a rhythm. My throat burned in answer. Saren whispered, "He started the call with my signature to force your resonance into completion." "You can tell that from here?" "I can tell from the way he's standing. If he thought the chamber was stable, he'd be behind the seal frame." That was such a specific thing to notice, I almost asked how she knew. Then I remembered who she was. Top-ranked combat sigillist, discipline council, shrine line. She probably grew up learning how adults lie with posture around dangerous rituals. Narukami spoke again, smooth, measured. "The chamber is active. Delay increases drift. Drift increases collateral. You've already seen clock desynchronization. And next comes access seal conflict, barrier lag, and memory bleed across students in the South Quadrant." I wanted to dismiss that as pressure. Then I remembered the clocks. 10:14, 10:16, 10:17. The wall in the stairwell. "Do not trust tower sync. If reset occurs, check west clock first." My mouth went dry. What exactly is a reset? Narukami did not answer immediately. He looked for the first time like he was choosing between truths. "A continuity correction event," he said. "When an unresolved bond tied to an institutional anchor begins replaying causality errors, the system attempts to reconcile contradictory records. If unmanaged, people caught near the event can lose sequence integrity." I stared at him. "You mean memory?" "I mean more than memory." His voice stayed flat. "Timing, position, witness agreement, documented cause and effect. A person can remember walking into a room and leave records showing they never arrived. Or the inverse." Saren's grip on my wrist shifted. Not looser, just more conscious. And 19 people?" Narukami met her eyes. "Last time, The annex chose a declarant pair during a student evacuation. The pair refused mutual declaration. The chamber escalated. South quarter barriers desynced. Stairwells looped. Crowd movement collapsed. He said it clinically, but the image landed anyway. Students running, corridors folding, exits disagreeing with maps. People piling into bad geometry while the system tried to correct reality. I heard myself ask, when? Narukami's pause was brief. Before your current records begin. The line went through me like ice. Before my current records begin. Saren stared at him. You buried a casualty event under a continuity seal and kept the chamber online. He turned slightly toward her, just enough to show his irritation. I inherited a sealed system under donor and tribunal restriction. I manage risk within the authority available. By forcing declarations. By preventing recurrence. The bronze light in the annex pulsed harder. One of the cedar pillars cracked with a sound like a dry branch snapping. The registry officers flinched. Narukami did not. Saren leaned close to me without taking her eyes off him. Decision now. If we leave, he can label you active hazard and lock the lower wards. If we enter, the chamber will push for declaration. Are those the only options? Probably not. A beat. The others are worse. I almost laughed. My whole day had narrowed from exam anxiety to ancient contract chamber triage. I said, "You told me not to speak my full name first." "Yes. What do I say instead?" "Nothing if you can help it." Narukami heard enough to catch the direction, if not the words. His tone sharpened. "Miss Vale, do not contaminate the declaration process." She bared her teeth in something that wasn't a smile. "You contaminated it when you pre-anchored me." He made a small signal to the registry officers. And the seal frame whined. A restraint field began to unfold across the threshold, invisible except for a shimmer in the air. Not a combat barrier, a legal one. It would hold long enough to force us into either retreat or scripted entry. Safe system, failed again. "Move," Saren said. She shoved me sideways just as the first field line snapped into place. Instead of retreating up the stairs, she cut low across the hall toward the right-hand wall, where an old maintenance conduit ran beneath the stone at ankle height. She slashed 3 chalk marks into the conduit cap, slapped a paper strip over the center, and kicked the wall. The conduit blew open with a burst of hot dust and blue sparks. Not elegant, effective. The legal field across the threshold stuttered as the annex lighting flickered. For half a second, the seal frame lost synchronization with the chamber pulse. Saren used that half second like she owned it. She dragged me through the failing edge of the field and into the annex itself, his shoulder first, while the registry officers shouted and Narukami snapped a command I didn't catch. Crossing the threshold felt like stepping through cold water and static at the same time. My hearing dropped, then returned in fragments. The bronze names on the wall accelerated. The cracked crystal lens overhead flashed, and the burn mark on my throat ignited hard enough to put black spots in my vision. I stumbled to one knee on the outer ring of the dais. The chamber answered. Contract channels lit under my hand. White light raced through the floor spirals, hit the split shared line between the handprint recesses, and slammed into the bronze glow anchored to Serene's name. The whole room rang once, low and resonant, like a bell struck underwater. Narukami's composure broke by a fraction. "Don't let him touch the line!" Too late. I jerked my hand back, but the contact had already triggered something. The crystal lens above us cracked one line further and projected a veil of glyphs into the air between me and the dais. Not text exactly. Layered declarations, timestamps, witness marks, error flags, and what looked like overlapping versions of the same event stamped reconcile pending. Saren pulled me to my feet and shoved me behind one of the cedar pillars as a restraint ribbon from the seal frame lashed through the space where my head had been. "You good?" she asked. "No," I said, functional." "Good enough." The registry officers entered the chamber now, one to either side of Narukami, carrying short rods capped with black seal wax, declaration enforcement tools. They moved carefully, as if they feared the floor as much as us. Narukami stopped at the outer ring. He didn't step onto the lit channels. "Mr. Ishida," he said, voice raised over the chamber hum. "Listen to me. The Annex has identified you. If you continue resisting formal declaration, it will escalate to autonomous resolution." I stared at the glyph veil between us. One line kept reforming no matter how the script shifted. Pair mismatch. Memory integrity. Failure declaration loop risk. I pointed at it. "It says mismatch." Narukami's jaw tightened. "It says loop risk, which is the part currently threatening the campus." Saren glanced around the pillar and saw the same line. "Memory integrity failure," she repeated, quieter. "So the bond is real, but one or both declarants were altered." "Don't!" Narukami snapped. That one word told us more than his lecture did. Saren looked at me. "He doesn't want us reading the chamber. He wants us answering him. Can we ask it questions?" "It's a declaration system, not a library." A beat. "But maybe." The crystal lens pulsed again. Images flashed inside the glyph veil, too fast to parse, like frames from damaged film. A corridor. Bells. Paper seals burning. A hand covered in blood pressing against stone. A profile that could have been mine or any other dark-haired student from the wrong angle. Then a voice, not in the room, in my head, or in the pulse beating through the throat mark. "Not yet." I froze. Saren saw it immediately. "What?" I swallowed. Something said, "not yet." Her face went pale in a way the fight hadn't caused. "The chamber?" "I don't know." Narukami heard enough to pivot. "That is exactly why we need controlled declaration. Auditory bleed precedes sequence overlap." I was getting very tired of him being potentially correct for the wrong reasons. One of the registry officers stepped onto the second ring and slammed his seal rod into a floor socket. Black wax hissed. New scripts spread outward in straight lines, crossing the old spirals and forcing them into a grid. The chamber lights lurched. Saren's head snapped around. "He's trying to impose modern registry order over a shrine contract chamber. Can he do that? Maybe for a minute. Then either it stabilizes or the room eats the rods." "Comforting." She looked at the split shared line in the dais. "If we can force a chamber native query before his override completes, we may get a direct read." I stared at her. "You say things like we've done this before." The words were out before I could stop them. For the first time since the alley, she looked genuinely shaken. "Sometimes I know where to stand before I look." That was answer enough. Narukami lifted his hand. "Final warning. Step into the declaration circle and state identity in sequence, or I authorize restraint and emergency closure." Saren muttered, "He can't close it cleanly now." "You sound very sure for somebody who kidnapped me with a pulse-tuned talisman this morning." "I'm adapting." Terrifying. The bronze wall names accelerated again. The glowing line beside Saren's name brightened, and I finally read the inscription beneath it. "A declarant preserved by prior claim." Prior claim! I looked at Saren. "What did you do 3 months ago when you found the document?" She did not answer quickly enough. "Saren!" Her eyes stayed on Narukami. "I tested a partial declaration to confirm whether the chamber still recognized the old signatures." My disbelief came back, sharp and clean. "You partially married me to a ghost contract in a hidden annex?" Her mouth tightened. "I said partial." Narukami actually laughed once, like a man hearing a student accidentally confirm his thesis. "Yes, there it is. The unauthorized contact that reactivated the bond chain." Saren rounded on him. "You were monitoring the annex before that." "Of course." "You let it sit dormant." "I contained it." "You waited." He didn't deny it. The room shook. Not metaphor, physical movement. Stone dust fell from the cedar beam joints. One of the override grid lines snapped and recoiled across the floor, burning a black groove through the outer ring. The registry officer nearest it stumbled back, nearly dropping his seal rod. Narukami's head turned sharply toward the crystal lens. Sequence drift accelerating. Ah, yes, see, the glyph veil thickened. Layered lines crashing over each other. More images flashed. Same corridor, same bells, but now I caught details. Students in white evacuation masks. A warden screaming without sound. Sarin, another Sarin, younger maybe, blood on her sleeve, hand on a stone wall. Me, someone with my face turning away as doors closed. Then the line from the stairwell, but clear this time, spoken in a voice that was mine and not mine. If he laughs, start over. My knees nearly gave out. Sarin grabbed my elbow. Ren! I looked at her and the chamber doubled for half a second. 2 Sarins, one in present clothes, chalk dust on her cuff, hair loose from the run. One in older ceremonial white, sleeve torn, eyes red-rimmed, standing in the same place but angled toward the dais. The double image snapped back so hard I bit my tongue. Okay, I said through the copper taste in my mouth. That's new. Narukami took a step toward us despite his own caution. You're crossing, stay verbal. State present markers, name, date, location. He was right again, and I hated using his advice. Ren Ishida, I said. 3rd year legal forensics, Kurogane Annex. Today is... My mind stalled. Date. Simple, every day. Gone for one terrifying beat. Sarin squeezed my arm hard enough to hurt. Tuesday, midterm week. The date snapped back. I finished it, breathing too fast. Narukami spoke to the officers. Restraint now. The seal frame flared. Ribbons of legal script lashed toward us, converging at chest height. Sarin shoved me down and met the first ribbon with her blade. Metal should not cut law script. Her blade did, because the edge was lined with powdered shrine ink and something darker that smoked on contact. The ribbon split, but 3 more came behind it. I crawled, not gracefully, toward the dais while Serene bought space with impossible footwork and very possible desperation. One ribbon caught her shoulder and burned through fabric. She hissed, twisted free, and drove a chalk strip into the floor to break the anchor point. The chamber hummed louder. The crystal lens overhead flashed white. I reached the declaration circle and saw the handprint recesses up close. 2 palms, shared line, name grooves old enough to hold dust and blood, and probably more history than the university's public archives admitted. The left recess, Sarin's side, glowed bronze from the partial claim. The right side pulsed white, unstable. If I touched it, I risked giving the chamber the exact consent Narukami wanted. If I didn't, his override might finish and lock the result anyway. No safe option. Fine. I did what legal forensics trains into you before it trains anything else. Read the physical evidence before the witnesses. The grooves around the right handprint were not empty. They were clogged with residue, blackened wax from modern seal attempts, old copper dust, and something silver embedded deep in the line channels. I scraped a fingernail across it. Metal thread. Not random. A cut line. Someone had severed this declaration path before. Sarin! I shouted. The right channel was intentionally cut. She was busy surviving. Can you repair it? I don't know what the metal is. Narukami answered from across the chamber too quickly. Do not touch the channel. It's a sacrificial break to prevent recurrence. That was the 3rd time he'd told us not to inspect the thing we were standing on. I dug harder. The silver thread came free in a short piece, and the moment it left the groove, the chamber lights dipped. The white pulse in my throat mark surged. A new line of glyphs slammed into the veil overhead, all larger than the rest. Declaration path, sabotaged secondary declarant memory stripped continuity review. Fraud flagged. The room stopped. Even the seal frame stuttered. One registry officer whispered, Fraud flag? Narukami moved fast then, faster than his polished Dean Act had prepared me for. He abandoned the outer ring, stepped directly onto the lit spiral despite the risk, and reached for the nearest seal rod with both hands. Complete the override, he shouted. So much for controlled procedure. Saren saw the same thing I did. If the chamber had publicly flagged fraud, his only move was to force closure before the system finalized the record in native script. She kicked off a cedar pillar, took a restraint ribbon across the thigh, and still landed between Narukami and the central line. He struck at her with the seal rod like a staff, not elegant but effective. She blocked once, twice, lost grip on her blade on the third impact, and the rod clipped her temple hard enough to send her staggering into the handprint recess. Her palm hit the bronze-lit side. The chamber roared. Bronze light exploded upward around her arm and locked her in place to the elbow. Not burning, binding. Her eyes went wide, then unfocused for a fraction, like the room had shown her something, and she was failing to process all of it at once. "Saren!" She blinked hard, looked at me, and said 3 words in a voice that was not panicked enough for the blood on her face. "It was me." Narukami lunged past her toward my side of the circle. I moved on instinct. The silver thread was still in my hand. I shoved it into the cut channel, just as his seal rod came down toward the right recess. The thread bridged the gap. My palm hit the white handprint. Every sound in the room vanished. Not dampened. Gone. The annex became light and pressure, and images layered so thick I could not tell which direction was forward. Bells ringing late, as stairwells looping, students running, paper masks. Saren, older, younger, grabbing my sleeve and shoving me toward the circle while blood ran down her wrist. Narukami, not as dean, but in plain registry robes, younger-faced, shouting over a failing barrier. A line of script rewriting itself. My own voice saying no, then saying wait, then laughing, sharp, disbelieving, because she had said the same impossible sentence then as now. "We're already married." The memory didn't return cleanly. It collided. I saw why the line existed. We had been declarants before. Students, not lovers in the sentimental way she first sounded in the alley, but co-signers in an emergency continuity bind during a prior reset event. Temporary marriage format contract, because old chambers accept pair bond declarations faster than casualty triage under threat. Shrine logic, brutal and practical, and it failed. Not because the bond was false, because the declaration path was sabotaged mid-process. My memory strip was taken to prevent repeat recognition, and the system was closed under a continuity seal while the university rewrote the event as an infrastructural accident. 19 dead, 1 unresolved bond, 1 preserved declarant, 1 stripped. The silence broke all at once. I was on my knees in the circle, palm burning against stone. Narukami half turned away as the seal rod in his hands cracked lengthwise from the chamber backlash. The registry officers had dropped their rods entirely. Serene was still bound to the bronze side, breathing hard, blood at her hairline, eyes clear now, in a way they had not been underground. The glyph veil above us had changed. No more mismatch warning, no more loop risk. The script stabilized into a single declaration record in broad, undeniable lines. Prior declaration verified, forced reset, confirmed memory strip, unlawful closure order, invalid review, authority escalated. And below it, in smaller script that made every person in the room go pale, presiding officer of prior closure, Narukami Tetsuo. Narukami did not deny it. For the first time all day, he looked his age and then some. He set the cracked seal rod down very carefully and looked at the chamber record as if he had spent years making sure no one ever saw that exact line. The registry officers backed away from him on instinct. Saren's voice came out rough but steady. "You signed the closure." He didn't look at her. "I signed a containment order after the tribunal refused evacuation expansion." "You stripped his memory." His silence was answer enough, but he still tried to shape it. "I authorized selective sequence removal to prevent the annex from relocking onto an unstable pair. We had casualties. We had barriers failing. We had minutes." I pushed myself upright with my free hand, the chamber still binding my palm to the white recess. "So you erased 1 declarant, preserved the other under partial claim, buried the event, and kept the system online. I preserved the campus. No, Saren said, bronze light trembling around her arm. You preserved the institution's version of what it did. The chamber liked that line. The glyphs brightened. Narukami finally looked at me directly. If I had not done it, the reset would have expanded. Maybe, I said, but you don't get to call it continuity when you cut people out of the record, and then bait the same pair back into a chamber years later under containment. Something in his face hardened then. Not guilt gone, resolve replacing it. You think this ends because the Annex raised a fraud flag. It escalates. Tribunal auditors, donor councils, shrine trustees, every faction with standing over Kurogani's charter will descend on this campus. They will not ask which students died first. They will ask who controls the chamber now. He looked at our bound hands on the declaration circle. I understood before he said it. The Annex has recognized both declarants, he said. That authority transfers unless the chamber is dissolved. Saren swore softly. He wants us to close it. Narukami spread his hands, almost pleading now but still shaping the room. Close the chamber voluntarily. Confirm dormancy. Let the record stand. You can testify later under proper review. The registry officers looked between him and the glyphs overhead, uncertain. They had come for a scripted containment and were now standing inside a live fraud exposure attached to their dean. One of them, the younger one, with the wax-scarred hand, said, "Dean." The fraud flag automatically escalates to tribunal. Narukami answered without looking away from us, only if the record transmits before chamber closure. There it was, the real final move, not just controlling the declaration, preventing transmission. I looked up at the cracked crystal lens hanging over the dais, the chamber's output node. If he could force a local closure before the stabilized fraud record broadcast to the registry net, the Annex could be resealed again under emergency authority, and we'd be reduced to disputing memory against institutional paperwork. Saren read my face. You thinking what I'm thinking? No idea. I only got my missing past back 30 seconds ago. Fair. The bronze binding on her arm pulsed. She winced, then breathed through it. The chamber recognized us. That means it accepts paired directives. How do we give one while pinned? By mutual line. I looked at the split shared name groove between our hands. The silver thread I jammed in still held the cut channel closed, but barely. It glowed white at one end, bronze at the other, and shook with every chamber pulse. Narukami saw our attention shift and moved. He snatched the portable seal frame off its tripod and swung the open loop toward the crystal lens overhead. Not to hit it, to encase it, seal and isolate the transmission node. Now! He shouted at the officers. The older officer hesitated. The younger did not. He grabbed a backup rod and ran a line toward the frame. Saren looked at me. Mutual directive. Short phrase. Chamber native, not registry. I don't know the phrase. You do. Her eyes were bright now, furious and focused and terrified in a way she refused to show until it mattered. Use the old line. I knew which one she meant before she finished. If they reset us, don't let me sign alone. Not a vow, an instruction. Maybe enough. Narukami lifted the seal frame. The younger officer drove the rod toward the lens mount. I tightened my hand in the burning recess and said, "If they reset us..." Saren answered immediately, voice cutting through the chamber roar. "Don't let me sign alone!" Y'all, for one suspended instant, nothing happened. Then the shared line between us ignited. Bronze and white raced through the repaired channel, hit the silver thread bridge, and surged upward in a spiral column that split the air between us and the crystal lens. The portable seal frame shattered in Narukami's hands. The backup rod flew from the officer's grip and embedded in a cedar beam. Contract script erupted across the chamber ceiling in concentric rings so dense the light turned almost solid. The Annex accepted the phrase, not as a memory fragment, as a valid paired directive. The glyph veil rewrote itself one final time, louder than sound, clear enough that even a panicking first year could have read it. Declaration authority transferred to surviving pair. Annex transmission unsealable during active fraud review. Emergency closure request denied. Narukami stood in the white bronze light, empty hands open. And for the first time all day, he looked like a man who had reached the end of a system he could manage. The crystal lens overhead flashed once, blindingly bright. Then the chamber transmitted. You could feel it leave, not through air, but through the floor and walls, and all the hidden channels Kurogane pretends are only architecture. The campus clocks would have caught it first. Then the registry servers. Then the tribunal mirrors. Then every backup archive that still respected Shrine-era contract priority. No one in that room was controlling the narrative anymore. The bronze binding released Serene's arm. My hand tore free from the right recess hard enough to leave skin behind. I hit the floor and rolled, coughing, ears ringing, vision swimming. Across the dais, the two registry officers dropped to their knees, not in worship, shock. The younger one was crying and didn't seem to know it. Narukami remained standing. He looked at me, then at Serene, and then up at the fraud record still burning across the air. When he spoke, his voice was quiet and very tired. You have no idea what the trustees will do with a live annex pair. Saren pressed her bleeding hand to her temple and answered before I could. Maybe, but we know what you did with one. That ended the room. Not with violence, with consequence settling into place. Tribunal wardens hit the annex 7 minutes later. Real ones this time, not campus registry proxies, and they came through every entrance at once with suppression veils and audit seals already active. Someone upstairs had moved very, very fast once the transmission hit. The next hour blurred into statements, medical checks, sealed corridors, and overlapping authorities trying to claim precedence over a chamber none of them had expected to wake up publicly. Narukami was taken under provisional inquiry. He did not resist. The registry officers split immediately. Older one lawyered up on the spot. A younger one gave an initial statement before his supervisor could reach him. Saren and I were separated, then put back in the same audit room after the annex record cross verified our paired recognition. And half the tribunal staff decided separating us might trigger another drift event. Bureaucracy, when frightened enough, becomes practical. We sat on opposite sides of a metal table while a medic cleaned the cut on her head, and another medic wrapped my palm. No dramatic speech, no reunion scene. We were too exhausted and too angry in too many directions. After the medics left, she stared at the bandage on my hand and said, I should have told you what I suspected before I put a talisman on your throat. I leaned back, every muscle aching. Yes. A small, humorless exhale. I know. Silence sat with us for a minute. Then I said, Were we actually married? She looked up, surprised, and then away again as if checking the wording before she gave it to me. The first time, in emergency declaration terms, yes. In any normal sense. She winced. It was a continuity bind under casualty threat. Temporary. It should have dissolved after review. But it didn't. No, because he cut the channel and stripped my memory. She nodded once. I rubbed my eyes with my uninjured hand. So your opening line in the alley was technically true and completely psychotic. That finally got a real reaction from her, a short laugh that turned into a wince because of the cut on her temple. Fair, she said. We didn't fix anything in that room. There wasn't time. Tribunal auditors rotated through. Lawyers appeared and disappeared. Witness scripts were proposed, rejected, revised. At some point, someone brought us terrible tea, and a stack of continuity law manuals like this was now a study group. By evening, the campus was on partial lockdown. Classes suspended. South Quadrant sealed. As student channels flooded with rumors ranging from dean arrested for cult marriage chamber to clock bug caused by engineering prank. The official notice called it a historical registry anomaly review. Institutions love passive verbs when active ones have names attached. The tribunal gave me temporary protective status as a material declarant. They gave Saren conditional release under the same designation, with restrictions she read once and signed without comment. Kurogani's trustees petitioned to suspend the annex entirely and were denied pending full audit because the chamber itself had become an evidentiary source. Narukami's first statement to the tribunal leaked by midnight. In it, he admitted to emergency continuity actions during the prior event, but framed the memory strip as a lawful necessity under catastrophic conditions. That fight would take months, maybe years. The dead from the first event were still dead no matter what terms he used. As for us, the annex authority transfer was real. That part nobody liked. A surviving pair recognized by a live continuity chamber holds procedural standing over certain declarations until the chamber is dissolved or properly readjudicated. Old law, shrine law, inconvenient law, which meant the trustees could not quietly reseal the annex, and the Registry Bureau could not rerun the declaration under a cleaner script without our presence. The campus had spent years burying an unfinished bond and woke up to discover it now had witnesses. 2 nights later, after 12 hours of depositions and 3 different people explaining why I should not leave tribunal lodging without escort, I stood on the west dorm roof and watched the tower clocks. All of them read the same time, for the first time since that morning. Saren found me there anyway, despite the escort protocols, carrying 2 paper cups of machine coffee and a folder thick with copied annex records. Her hair was tied back badly. The cut on her temple had been stitched. She looked less like the white banner and more like a tired student who had fought an institution in a basement and then had to fill out forms about it. She handed me a cup and stood beside me without touching. "I got the stairwell wall photos," she said after a while. "There are more notes higher up, different handwriting. Some of them look like mine." "Past yours?" "Maybe." I sipped the coffee. It was awful. It helped. She opened the folder and showed me one copied page from the annex output. Most of it was dense contract script, but one line had been translated in the margin by a tribunal clerk. Reset recurrence condition. Declarants separated prior to review. I read it twice, then a second line below it. Mitigation condition, joint presence until adjudication. I looked at her. She looked back with exactly the same tired irritation. Don't say it," she said. "I wasn't going to." "You were." "I was going to say your kidnapping plan was legally proactive." She stared at me for a second, then laughed into her coffee despite herself. The sound was brief and human and wrong for how the week had gone, which is probably why I remember it. We stood there while the synchronized clocks ticked over another minute, campus lights reflecting off the barrier glass beyond the athletic dome. Somewhere below us, students were still arguing in group chats about whether the dean had actually been arrested, whether classes would be canceled for the rest of the week, whether the rumor about a hidden marriage chamber was a metaphor or a curse. None of them knew the part that mattered yet. Not the scandal, not the dean, not even the dead file finally reopened. The part that mattered was simpler and worse. The system had tried once to separate us and call it stability. It had failed in a way it managed to hide for years. Then it saw the same pattern returning and reached for the same tools again. This time, it missed. For now. Before she left, Saren took the folder back, hesitated, and said, "I still don't know what we were to each other before the first event, outside the declaration." I watched the west clock tick in clean, agreed seconds. "Neither do I," I said. That was the truth, and neither of us tried to improve it. When she went back down the roof access stairs, she locked the door behind her out of habit. I stayed a little longer with the bad coffee and the synchronized clocks, and the feeling that time, for the moment, was behaving only because too many people were watching it.